I work in restoration. Your house or business floods, my crew comes in and dries everything up, cleans the baseboards, preps the place, tosses the ruined stuff in the dumpster, and hauls it away. We leave the place clean and ready for a fresh coat of paint. I'm usually pretty proud of the work me and my crew do. We do it all. Mostly we do flood damage, but there are times we get calls from rich folks to remove stains from stone and concrete structures. I've had a museum call me for the same. I've made a name for myself in being able to get just about any stain out of any stone. You think it's easy? Or that you can just scrub away a stain? Folks seem to forget that marble ain't a solid material. It's porous. It sucks in the liquid. That's why polish and maintenance are important. That being said, I ain't an idiot though. Plenty of times I get called in for red wine. Yeah, okay, I get it. You were partying with hookers, she OD'd, conked her head on the fireplace of the coffee table, and suddenly there's a pool of blood on the marble floor of your penthouse, and you just can't get the stain out. Worse, the wife's home next week. I've done the cleanup enough times to know a few things. A, you don't ask stupid questions. Hell, half the time the hooker's fine, or would have OD'd anyway, with or without the expensive John. It's really no skin off my nose, and if you're cleaning up the scene before the cops can show up, well, that's on them. I've got a job to do, and I do it. B, do not remember these people. I'm not some guy who's going to get brought in on indecent hearing or some stupid tabloid media circus, all because I suddenly decided to have a good memory. I do a job like this. I get your address, I show up, I shake your hand, I call you Mr. Smith, and then I leave. After that, I delete your address, and I carry on with my life. The less I know, the safer I am. That being said, I don't get the blood cleanup very often. It's normally innocent stuff. Wine, sewage, floodwater, human feces. You think it's gross, but it's easier than anything else to get clean. I already hear you asking, what was my weirdest request? I need to give you some context on weird. I had a call to clean up a place after something called a Luna party, which somehow involved a whole lot of menstrual blood and dancing in it. Next time, bring a tarp. That was probably my weirdest call. It was a Friday. I don't know why that mattered when I got the call. The secretary was out for lunch, as was the rest of the crew. Rather than let it all go to voicemail, I took the phone call. That was my first mistake. M&C Restoration Inc., Fred speaking. Yeah, that's me. I'm Fred. There was a pause, and then a guy's voice comes over. Kinda timid. Yes, hello. I understand from your ad that you can remove stains from all sorts of stone? Maybe marble as well? Yeah, it's our specialty. What sort of stain you talking about? Blood. I never had someone just out and out say it. I get all the pussyfooting around, sure. Wine, salsa, sangria. Sangria was my favorite, considering that blood is in the name. But this guy, he just came out and said it plainly. How large an area we talking? Another pause. I'd say about maybe 10,000 square feet. Not the property, I tried to clarify. Just the stain? Yeah, I know. You need 10,000 square feet of marble, which is stained with blood. Cleaned. Yes? This time I had to take a moment. How many gallons was that? I thought back to that lunar party thing or whatever, but even that was only a single floor. I'm sorry. Some context is probably needed. My name's Timothy. I work in antiques. A curator friend of mine referred me to you after you managed to clear his museum steps of some blood that apparently occurred when someone took a nasty fall. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm still trying to process 10,000 square feet of stained tile, buddy. Is it too much? I was still a bit dumbfounded. Let me be frank. This site was the location of a rather bloody massacre some time ago. My colleagues and I have already examined the site in its entirety, and we're looking to begin restoration. At this point, my concern got overridden by cash. Antiquities? Historical site? That sounded like a fat government contract. Christmas come early for old Freddy. What's the budget for this project of yours? Time is more of the essence than anything. We need the site cleaned in preparation for other restoration efforts, so as soon as possible would be preferred. Your fee is essentially yours to name. You're literally the only one who I can call for this task. Haggling wasn't this guy's strong suit. Sounded to me like he needed to read the art of the deal. You're talking a whole lot of space to clear. 10,000 square feet is a whole lot of floor. It's not all floor. A good portion of it is on the walls and the ceiling. How high is the ceiling? Oh, about 50 feet. I was silent again. I was going to need to rent a scissor lift for that. I thought for a moment before I cleared my throat. I'm going to need a lot of equipment, material, at least 5 guys if you want this job done right, and fast. Of course. How long has the marble been stained? There was a moment of silence. By the current timeline? Well, 200. Wait, what's the current year again? It's 2018, I said. Not sure why he'd be asking, but I figured I shouldn't sound stupid. 350 years? Roughly? I thought for a moment, thinking about how, this being the United States, there was no way for there to be a structure like he was talking about. I ignored him and assumed he had to be wrong. Anything over a decade is as set as it's going to be anyway. I took a breath. I can't do it for less than 30 grand. I figured he'd work on needling the price down, but then he shocked me again. Understandable. I'm assuming I can ignore the number of taxes and paperwork if I provide cash up front? I coughed in shock, nearly swallowing my cigarette. Yeah, certainly. Cash. I'm gonna have to have this job done, and it was gonna have to be tax-free. It felt like I just won the friggin' lotto. So the job itself comes up. I've got my crew rolling to the address. The address was a huge rusted gate, chained on the front, typical of a site you're not allowed to get to. I see a guy standing about 6 feet in a black trench coat, black sunglasses, gloves, black dress shoes and slacks, black hair, pretty pale all things considered. He doesn't say a word and unlocks the chain on the gate. Pulled it off pretty quick too. I thought it was a heavier gauge than he made it seem, but I was probably just mistaken, being in a huge truck and not too close to the gate. The guy opens the gate and walks up the side of the truck. Fred, right? He says flatly. I nod, reaching out a hand to him. You Tim? Timothy, yes, he asked, shaking hands. He had a firm handshake. His hair is cut short, trim, proper. Military? I asked. He nods, stepping back and pointing down past the gate, motioning with his non-directing hand to move. Yeah, definitely military. So I nod and drive up. I see a huge mansion, white and gray stone steps, old siding falling apart, boarded up windows, a messed up roof, and the entire place looks to be knocked down. Rather, getting rebuilt was apparently on the docket for today. Didn't matter. I was getting paid enough not to care. As we unload, Timothy opens up the front doors and starts talking loudly. The doors need to be open at all times while you work. There's no ventilation inside. He's got a pair of pretty heavy-duty door stops on each side. From the outside, I can't see anything. Nothing but pitch black. You're going to need lights, so I hope you brought a generator. I laugh while my crew unloads the truck, setting up 2 generators and pulling down some cans of gas. This ain't my first rodeo. So it would seem, said Timothy, and then he walks inside and vanishes into the blackness. I motion for the crew to set up the lights, and the first place we go is on either side of the door. He wasn't kidding about needing light. The boards were perfect, and the inside was absolutely pitch black, like the middle of a moonless night dark. I hear the generators kick on, and the lights perk up a second later. That's when I see a massive white face appear out of the dark with brown drips across it. It's an angelic woman, carved expertly out of marble. I swear I can see the pores on her cheeks and the split ends on her long hair. There's a second similar statue about 30 feet to the left, and it's covered in brown stains. I hear one of my guys, Chavez, speak up. My God. That's about when I got the hint that something wasn't right. Chavez spoke up again. Hail Mary, our Father protect us. I picked up Chavez from a day labor site about a year ago, and I've been paying him under the table ever since. He's either from Mexico or Honduras. He's a good worker, so I never bothered to ask too many questions. He's too much. This place is cursed to high hell. There's blood all over these angel statues. What is this? Chavez was rambling. You see, the reason I never asked Chavez where he's from was that Chavez doesn't speak a goddamn bit of English. Timothy's voice soon echoed across the room, walking over the solid marble in a various state of stains and scrapes. I trust this isn't too much for you or your men, he said. I didn't actually spot where he had come from. I hadn't really been paying attention until Chavez got a smack upside the head from one of my full-timers, a guy named Pete. Just when the hell did you learn to speak English, Chavez? Since when did you know how to speak Spanish, Peter? Chavez retorted. Timothy seemed agitated. Gentlemen, if we can begin the job now? And he walked past us and outside. I turned to both of my men. Pete, Chavez, shut the hell up, both of you. We do this job, go home, and we all get a good paycheck. Capiche? No more questions. Let's get moving. This place is cursed, Chavez said before turning around and pulling in the pressure washers and detergent bottles. I got in Chavez's face then, certain he would understand me. Then the quicker we get started, the quicker we can get the hell out of here. Comprende? Understood, Chavez said, looking confused. Pete then spoke up. Hey, boss. He focused a flashlight on a portion of the floor where the stains ended. I looked over to where the light was shining. The brown stains were everywhere, as described, but towards where one large swath of brown ended was an impression on the floor and the stuff. It was a lot clearer than anything else. The impression was of a sword, which had been drenched in blood. The sword-shaped stain didn't bother me. It's what was apparently holding it. An outstretched arm shape, then two massive wing-like stains on either side. There was a very human-like profile on the floor. We each had an idea of what we were looking at, but we were too stunned at the sight. Chavez was the first one to break the silence. Angels died here. I heard what Chavez said, but don't think I was letting it sink in. Angels don't die. Angels don't exist, personally, but that's neither here nor there. If angels existed, I'd have seen a damn miracle or two around my house. My mother was a god nut, super religious, yet nothing saved her from that car accident or stopped my father's cancer. Now, there's some rational explanation. I know there is. This imprint on the floor, it could be human. Timothy said it was a massacre over 300 years ago, after all. So some guy died in a pool of his own blood, sword in hand, and the rest pooled in the shape of the wings. No, couldn't be wings. This was kind of like a Rorschach test. Someone sees puffy clouds, Chavez sees wings because there's two giant 30-foot statues of angels flanking the center of the damn room. It's in his head, that's all. I get a hold of myself. Chavez, Pete, get the scissor lift in here. Help out Bob and Mike, and let's get this job over with. Sooner we start, the sooner we're done. Chop, chop. Pete gets motivated pretty quick, but Chavez is now on one knee, making the cross over his chest and saying God prayers. I ignore him for now and get busy myself with the task at hand. The most difficult problem first. The statue on the left needs to be cleaned, and carefully, since it's a work of art. As Bob and I are guiding the scissor lift into the place, I hear Timothy shout something at Chavez. I rush over, now feeling like I'm on a normal work site. Hey, don't shout at my guys. What's going on? I intervene. Chavez has both his hands up, stepping back from a huge structure of canvas and plywood, making up a barricade to the right side of the structure. I was just checking for stains, Fred. Understanding Chavez is a new thing for me, but it's not entirely unwelcome. Timothy seems exasperated. I appreciate your due diligence, but this area is unstable. I cannot have anyone pass these barricades. I apologize. I should have made that very clear. The main room is where the cleaning must be done. Only the main room. Any area that's barricaded is unsafe. I can't be held liable for the safety of your men if they wander past them. I looked at Chavez. You heard the man. Help Bob with the scissor lift. Then get that pre-treat on the statue. Be careful, okay? What saint is she? Chavez nodded, looking at Timothy. Timothy looked at the statue for a moment and gets kind of a faraway look. Dinah of Enoch. Chavez gives Timothy the thumbs up and says, "I'll take good care of St. Dina. She will sparkle." He runs off to help Bob with the scissor lift, and a very confused Bob and Chavez make their way over to the statue of Dina, I guess. Timothy is smiling an odd kind of smile, and it almost breaks my no questions rule for a moment. I get my hard hat on and start shouting at Bob when I see he's not wearing a harness on the lift. Typical worksite stuff. Gotta remind the old-timers they're mortal and make sure the greenhorns of the group don't screw around. I'm happy to slide back into my routine. It wouldn't last, of course. About halfway through the day, we're just about done getting the bust of the statue clear, and I gotta say, she's looking as good as new. That's when I hear a huge bang. It sounds almost like someone took an aluminum pipe and smashed it down on the marble. It echoes over our tools, and even the guys with ear protection are taken back by the sound. I scream and shout to cut the equipment and tell Bob and Chavez to get off the scissor lift. Lord knows if something blew on that damn thing. It's a rental, after all. I call Mike over to take a look. Mike slides under the lift as Bob and Chavez unhook their harnesses. Chavez looks to me. "It wasn't the lift, boss." "Then just what the hell was it?" Chavez points to behind one of the barricades, and I spot Timothy running towards us. I think I hear him mumbling something like, "This can't be happening right now." I shout to him, "Hey Tim, you need a hand?" Timothy shoots me a stern look, and in a pretty practiced officer tone commands us, "No one is to go beyond this point. Something may have collapsed. If there's an issue, I'll let you know. You just stay here," and disappears behind a piece of plywood canvas. I look to my guys and tell them to continue to inspect the scissor lift, and then get back to work if everything's okay. God only knows what compelled me to walk towards the barricade at that moment. Morbid curiosity, maybe. Lapse in sound judgment. Mini stroke? Still not sure to this day. But man, this had to be the third or fourth stupidest thing I did that day. I get just close enough to hear voices. There's a woman on the other side, and there's Timothy. "I'm sorry, I truly am, but I'm afraid they're all gone," I hear Timothy say, hushed but still enough for me to hear. "I know your pilgrimage must have been arduous." The female voice sounds frantic, almost heartbroken. "But that can't be. Surely this can't be. Who would do such a thing? Who could? Was it an army?" "It was 2 people, unfortunately," he said, almost guiltily. "They seemed to come in relative peace, but it was soon apparent that at least one of them had other ideas. All fought valiantly, but they couldn't be stopped." The woman's voice was trembling. "It was her, wasn't it? The daughter of The pressure washer kicked in and startled me while drowning them both out, and I realized how close I was to the barricade trying to listen. I stepped back and made my way quickly to the rest of the group, keeping an eye on the far barricade. Timothy had vanished behind it, and I didn't see him emerge till we were about done for the day. Timothy stops as he sees it, in reverence of some kind, I guess, looking it over silently. I walked over to him. So far, so good. We should be able to get some pre-treatment on the floor, let it sit overnight, and we'll hit it hard tomorrow. "Your men do swift work," Timothy said with a nod. "That's what we do," I said proudly. Pete started yelling for me from across the room, and I excused myself to hustle over. "What's up?" I asked, looking over at where Pete was. He just points down. There, for a lack of a better word, is a gash in the flooring. I need to explain why this floor is unusual. More so than just having blood all over it, and more than the shape of said blood. You see, the floor doesn't have seams. It's a solid chunk of marble. Now, I've seen some expensive walls and floors that are just huge slabs, sure. Happens all the time. If you have enough money, they'll tow a mountain to your house. But this was a mansion worth of floor. And for the life of me, I couldn't find a damn seam in it. Now, the gash, it's almost 10 feet long, and at the center, it looks almost 6 inches deep. Even with the light, while I can see the bottom, it looks pretty dark inside the gash. Pete looks at me. I'm going to ignore how this got here and just ask what we're supposed to do. The surface scratches are easy to buff out, but this isn't going to buff out so easy, boss. I call Mike over to have a look. Mike looks it over and runs his hands over the edges of the opening, as well as on the sides. It's all stained, of course. Jesus. He stands up and looks over at us. That's one clean swipe. There's no cutting marks, like you'd get if you were slicing into it with a floor cutter. So, he thinks it over. Can I toss in some quickset to fill it? Get it most of the way full anyway, and we can just toss in some filler and polish it. I think we can do better with some resin, make it look a bit more natural. It's up to the client though, but this is going to cost extra. I look it over. A 2-inch, 10-foot, 6-inch deep slash in the marble certainly wasn't in the order. I look to see Timothy is already approaching us. Just the man I needed to see, I said. Timothy looks down and shakes his head. She did some serious damage. Don't ask, just don't, I keep saying in my head. We can fill it and get it level, may even make it look pretty, but this wasn't in the original quote, so I'd say about another $4,000. I'd feel bad if this entire job didn't feel like some crazy funhouse. Timothy, though, just nods. Fine, don't go crazy, just see it's level, that no one trips over it. Mike heads out to get the materials we need, and I drag one of the sandblasters over. The gash is smooth, and it'll need to be rougher if that quickset is going to fill it in right. Everyone gets to work while I start to blast on this thing. Then something black shoots straight out of the gash and clatters somewhere behind me. This is a prime example of why you always wear a hard hat, folks. I cut the blaster and look around. It doesn't seem like anyone else heard anything. I looked at what popped out of the gash and realized the gash is about 9 inches deeper, and I can see it's still solid marble. No subfloor of dirt. Nothing is behind me but my closed toolbox. Whatever popped out must have shattered when it hit the ground, or all I saw was sand and blood popping out of the gash on the floor. I get my ear protection back on and finish up prepping the gash to be filled. We pack up for the day after that. The floor is pre-treated. We store the tools and such inside and do a quick head count. I notice I'm short one Honduran. Oh yeah, mystery solved on that one. Chavez is from Honduras. I look around and then spot him coming out from behind the barrier. Timothy walking behind him, his hand on his shoulder. Shit. I run over. Chavez, what the hell are you doing? He told you not to. Sorry, boss. It won't happen again. He was very quiet and looked at Timothy. Please consider. I do not mind. It's dangerous, George, Timothy said. Discuss it with me later, okay? Chavez just nods and walks off. What was that about, I ask. Timothy just walks past me. I thought you didn't ask questions. Not when it involves one of my guys, who, I'm sorry, disobeyed your instructions, I said, clearing my throat. Timothy glanced back at me, and with the light from the door behind him, I kinda got the best look at his ice blue eyes. Ensure it doesn't happen again, Fred. I just nodded dumbly as the red flags kept waving in my head. Just don't show up tomorrow. Take the money, leave the gear, go on your merry way. Granted, I had only been paid for half the job, but still, it was a decent amount. We got packed up and the crew and I headed out, packing my toolbox and other small items in the truck. I noticed Timothy was locking up the doors of the place and then escorting us to the gate. He closed them with him on the other side. I pull my truck up to the gate. You living on site? Yes, I have a trailer out back, Timothy said hesitantly. See you bright and early tomorrow then. Timothy just nods and waves us off. I never actually paid attention to where he went from there. I turned to Chavez in the truck and asked, So, what did you and Timothy talk about? "'Kay," is all Chavez said. He was messing with me, but I put it out of my mind, dropped Chavez off at his place, and he waved at me as always. Gracias, Senor Fred, and heads home. I head back to my house as well, thoroughly confused. At home, the kids are asleep, as is the wife, and I got my toolbox in the garage. I pop open my box as I've got a couple of things to swap out for the next day, specifically some mixing bits and the like. When I open my toolbox, however, something inside is certainly not a tool I've ever used. I suddenly recognize it. It's the object that came out of the gash. My toolbox was open behind me, and it must have closed as the thing slammed into it. The object is about 3 wide deep in the center, 2 feet long, and about 3 inches thick at the top, tapering to a point at the bottom. It looks like a wedge, and I realize it's probably blood that seeped out of the gash and solidified over the years. I pick it up, and it's light. Despite my attempts, though, I can't break the thing. Looking at this object in the light for the first time, it almost looks like a blade. Either that or the shape of the gash just shaped it into that thing. The top is flat, the bottom comes to a point. Not sharp, but it could be. Light seems to penetrate through the edge of this thing, and it's tinted a deep red. The rest appears to be black. I didn't even know blood could become solid, but I guess if there's enough of it, anything's possible. It's about 10 after 11 when I swear I hear 3 taps against the front door, as if I had a knocker or something. I don't, but anyway. I leave the object in my toolbox, closing it up and locking it, and head for the front door. I'm not an idiot. I make sure to check my closet next to the door and make sure my shotgun's loaded. It's after 11 p.m. What psycho comes knocking at someone's door this time of night? I open the door halfway, and I'm greeted by an outstretched hand with a black ring on each finger, one of which was about to tap against my door. The hand pulls back and clasps a wide-brimmed white hat, removing it from its head and lowering it to about chest level. One hand is behind him, and he's standing a good 6'3", wearing a white duster and some sort of red tie over a black, very expensive-looking dress shirt. He has white-rimmed glasses and yellowish eyes behind them, jet black hair that's well kept. As he speaks, it's almost like his voice doesn't match his body. His face isn't odd, but he doesn't stand out, and his voice sounds like it comes from an old cop movie. "Evening, young man. I understand you're working with an associate of mine. Goes by Timothy." While client confidentiality isn't my cornerstone, keeping my business out of my personal life sure as hell is. "Sorry, buddy. I'm gonna have to ask you to talk about business during business hours." His face falls slightly. "Now, this is important. Regarding that place you were working at, Timothy may have misled you, you see. He's using that place for his own means, not prosperity." He pulls out some kind of business card and twirls it over each finger before handing it to me. I look it over. It's just a phone number on it, no other information. His other hand brings out an unlit cigarette, which he brings to his mouth and inhales, smoke venting out of his nostrils. "If you were to happen across something of note, I'd appreciate it if you could contact me." "Yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm not the kind to take things off the work site. Normally, this is completely true." His oddly perfect teeth glisten off the front porch light as he spreads them into a shit-eating grin. True, be ashamed to take something you don't understand, only to wind up dead. He cocks an eyebrow at me. Or worse. By this point, I'd had it with the creep on my porch. "Listen, pal, hit the bricks, you hear me? Get the hell off my property or I'll call the cops." I try cocking my own grin, but I don't think it worked as well as his does. Or worse. He stands still. I can barely tell if he's breathing. I pump the shotgun behind the door. I know there's no point to it. I just eject a perfectly good shell. But I want him to hear that I had a gun, in a pump action, and it's in my hand. His voice suddenly changes, or he just drops the facade, and a raspy voice like that of a lifelong chain smoker slithers out of his throat, half a whisper, half a wheeze. "Not parting with it then, eh? Well, I'll have it one way or another for certain." The accent is hard to place. It's not quite Middle Eastern, but it's not like anything I've ever heard. I now pull the shotgun out and point it at his face. "And now I'm done with you. Whoever you are, get out." He doesn't even flinch. He just grins, a hissing chuckle dropping out of his mouth. "You're a fun one. Never once does your sort disappoint. Always resorting to fire provided by Prometheus." He paused, eyeing the barrels of the gun, never considering where it came from. I'm not sure where he pulled it from, but he suddenly crunches into an apple he must have had in his pocket. "I suppose I'll have to reconsider. Maybe when you're asleep. Like what happened to that hooker you cleaned up a few years back in Broadway." My heart skipped a beat. I don't talk about clients, and clients would never talk about me, and I never go into that much detail either. I just restore stuff. "A man of your skills is bound to clean up a homicide or two, knowingly or not." He tilts his head back, looking at me down the barrel of my gun. "Cleaning up the sin left behind by those less scrupulous than yourself. Oh, we've been watching you for some time." Now, for some reason, his eyes go wider. "Red Fred." I click the safety off the shotgun and put my finger on the trigger. "Get the hell out of here right now." Another loud crunch of his apple. He seems to be mocking me as he throws his hands up, walking backwards, keeping eye contact with those yellow eyes. "Very well. Another time, then. You are a fun one, Red." He turns and starts to walk off. I haven't moved the gun yet, still training it on him. "Don't call me Red, you..." I realized I haven't gotten the creep's name. The card he gave me just had a phone number. "Whatever your God-given name is." My mother always said that when she was mad. She shouted it out onto the phone all the time when telemarketers would give her a fake name. "What's your God-given name?" So it's a force of habit I picked up. I only said it when I'm really pissed off at somebody, and this guy had me pretty livid. Bar none, the dumbest thing I apparently did all day. He stops, dead on the walkway, his hand slowly going down to his side. "Oh, you compel my God-given name." His head starts to turn towards his right shoulder, but his shoulders aren't moving, not an inch. As I watch, I get ready to shoot. I swear if his head does a full 180-degree turn, I don't care what his name is, I'll start shooting until he stops moving, and probably pump a few more rounds into him just to be sure. His head stops just shy of a complete turn, and I can see both yellow eyes as he slowly places his hat back on his head. He grins, and I swear I watch his pupils dilate till his eyes look almost entirely black with yellowish rings around them. "You can tell Timothy my name too. It's Belial." He lets out another hissing laugh, and I swear I can hear the gun shaking in my hand for some reason. I don't know why, but I feel the blood drain out of my face for a moment, and the whole area got a bit dimmer, as if something was draining the light. I stagger slightly, but regain my footing, pressing the shotgun butt against my shoulder tightly, as if it was somehow gonna help me. He turned away from me, and as he walked off, he wheezed out, "Don't forget to tell Timothy I stopped by, and what I stopped by for." I pulled the gun back, shut the door, locked it, and shut the blinds. My heart was hammering in my chest as I checked the shells in my gun to ensure that it had been loaded. I clicked the safety back on, and I rushed upstairs to my bedroom. My wife was fast asleep as I sat on the edge of the bed, gun in hand, staring at my front door down the hall. I swear I can hear something three-tapping against the window at random times all night. Morning came, and I hadn't put the shotgun down yet. I was still sitting at the end of the bed, checking the windows. It seemed like the tapping stopped around dawn. I heard my wife's alarm go off, and the sounds of her rousing from her sleep. "Morning, honey," she mumbled, brunette hair a mass of frizz and tangles. "Morning," I said simply, making sure she was okay. She got out of bed and headed for the bathroom. I heard my kids' alarms go off next, and could hear my boys roughhousing in their room. My wife, Sandy, came out of the bathroom, toothbrush in hand, and was about to motion for me to go contain the wild animals that are my 15 and my 13-year-old boys. She stopped when she spotted the shotgun in my hand. She quickly spat out her toothpaste. "Fred, why the hell are you holding a shotgun?" She looked me up and down with her soft brown eyes. "Are those the clothes you were in when you came home yesterday?" "Honey, I got a visit from a guy who's probably not human in the least. He threatened the family if I don't return a red blade-like object that came from some mysterious excavation site." That's the most truthful thing I wanted to tell her, but it probably sounded totally insane. The more I played the sentence over and over in my head, the more I questioned whether I was the one that was sane. "Fred," she poked me in the shoulder. Apparently I'd been staring off into space, trying to think of a logical response to her completely irrational question. "Someone was on the lawn last night. They were banging on the door and wouldn't go away until I got the shotgun." Sandy cocked her hips and shot me one of those emasculating wife stares. "So rather than call the cops, you reached for the shotgun?" I cocked the shotgun and cleared the ammo out before heading back down to the closet to put the shells away. Just wasn't sure if it was a prowler or dumb kids. Sandy poked her head out of the bedroom. "Speaking of, Colin, Trevor, shake a leg." I closed the closet to see my boys bounding down the steps in various states of dress, dragging their backpacks and heading for the table. They start fighting over cereal, and I quickly resolve it, before a good scolding and getting them prepped for the bus. They finished up and are soon out the door with coats and sneakers on. My wife comes down next, wearing her robe. "Don't you have that job today?" I nod, looking at the time. "Guess you're right." "Then get motivated," she says. I do, and head out the door, giving the wife a kiss and heading back to the site, making sure that my toolbox is with me. It was about the same as the first morning. Timothy's there at the gate. He undoes the chain, and we all head to the mansion again. He props the doors open, and the crew heads in. I get the business squared away first. Chavez and Pete on the scissor lift to finish the few touches on the wall, while Bob and Mike get to mixing the quickcrete and filling in the gash on the floor. They also work on making sure these barriers between the gash and the rest of the work area, so we can work on the rest of the floor. During this prep work, I notice Mike eyeing the doorway. "Mike, you taking in the scenery?" Mike points to the roof on the outside. "Steepled." He leaned into the doorway, shining a light on the ceiling. "Flat. It's an attic." I look at Mike. Mike pulls out a laser measure. Steeple peak is 53 feet. Ceiling is 50 feet. He leans out again. Low point on the steeple is 44 feet. Flat ceiling is 50 feet. I cut him off though, grumbling a bit. "It's our last day on the job, Mike. Get it done. That thing's probably on the fritz anyway." "My eyes aren't on the fritz, Fred." "Damn your eyes," I said, seeing Bob looking at the same thing Mike was. "Bob, go do something." Bob seemed startled, but managed to compose himself and get back to setting up his tools. I walk past the doors. I'm a bit dumbfounded at this point. I thought you were concerned about ventilation. Timothy just walks right past me towards the barricades. Ventilation is the least of your worries at this moment. I turned around and the entire crew is dead silent. Not sure what to do as we hear some banging, a few doors closing, and then some rustling past the barricades. I just come out and say it. "We got this one day to get the floor cleaned and get that gash and the smaller scrapes and holes plugged. Move it now, and then we get the hell out of here." The crew seems pretty much on board, and the sound of work soon overpowers anything else. It had been about a half an hour since Timothy left, when I suddenly felt a hand on my shoulder, and I spun around out of sheer instinct. A small, round bottle was shoved into my hand. "That's for you," Timothy said, before he handed the bottle to the rest of the crew, too. I look and see it's just a small round glass bottle with a long spout on the top with a cap. Timothy doesn't have the object in question anymore, and as he heads towards the barrier again, I grab him. "Hey, I need at least a what the hell is this explanation, and a who the hell is that for the Belial guy." I glared at him. "That is for protection against Belial," Timothy says, pointing at the bottle. "That's half my question." "Who the hell is Belial?" I reiterated. Timothy looks up at the angelic statue, and I turn to see the large figure of Saint Denia. He's her opposite. Before he can elaborate, he's back behind the barrier. "Just finish up today and get the hell out of here. That's all I can think of." I grab a pressure washer and start working alongside the guys to get things rolling. It's the end of the day, and it's cleanup time. Timothy opens the doors and checks outside for something, and we all start loading up the truck. Timothy looks around, seemingly satisfied. "This is quite excellent work, Fred. Thank you." I nod, hoping we can finish up shortly. The gash in the floor is fully repaired, but it'll take 24 hours to cure. You can walk across it without much issue, though. We cleared up the main hall here, got the walls, the statues, the ceiling, and of course the floor squared away. "And the amphitheater," Chavez says, as he and Pete seem to be pulling equipment from the left side of the room. Pete's face is pretty pale as he walks by, but I stop them regardless. "Amphitheater." Pete just looks at me and shakes his head. "Chavez, that wasn't in the order," I said with a sigh. Timothy chimed in about that point. "How did you get into the amphitheater?" "I'm never gonna get out of this place, am I? So close, yet so far." Chavez happily shows us down the left-hand side of the hall and clicks on the light. A pair of massive 50-foot double doors stand right in front of us, each from the floor to the ceiling. The ceiling looks like it tapers to a dome. It's not so much that there's a pair of massive 50-foot tall doors right in front of me that are almost 20 feet wide. It's what's on the other side of these things. Carved into the marble are pictures of armor-clad angels with feather wings. Under their feet are various-looking creatures, a few of the angels standing over said defeated creatures with spears shoved into them. Others are in the process of smiting. As the doors go up, the carvings get wider. Not just feathery angels, but these other winged humanoid things. They look like lizards with wings. Strangest still is, at the very top of these doors, is a huge lizard-like figure, massive bat-like wings spread out, holding a shield with a cross on it and a huge spear. It's hard to see fully, but the doors seem to meet, or at least have to meet, in the middle where his face would go. If you could call it a face, I guess. It's mostly a lizard head with horns over a long snake-like tongue. Chavez takes a knee in front of the door and starts reciting God's prayer. One of them clicks open. Voice-activated door or something, I ask, hoping there's some kind of rational explanation and wondering why we haven't left yet. Chavez gets up and opens the door enough to walk in. He drags one of the lamps in and powers it on, motioning for us to come in. We found this door here, and Pete and I cleaned it up. It was easier than the rest. The floor here is different. I look down, and thank God, there's a seam. I finally found a seam in this place, but the seam is from the marble to granite. As I walked in, it's pretty clear that, oddly, everything is made of granite in this room. Stacking up in the darkness, so high you can't even tell, there's chairs. These chairs were large, stone chairs. They're all culminating around a central chair. A chair is an understatement. This was a throne. The chairs all surrounded the stage, and we found ourselves in a huge crescent. I turned to Timothy, whose gaze was transfixed on the central throne, that faraway look in his eye. Chavez was again the only one who spoke. Saint Denia? Timothy nodded and left the room. I didn't know how those doors opened. Thank you, Chavez. I click the lights off and pull the lights out, making sure everyone is out of the now perfectly dark room. Good work, guys. Now get packed. I'm now overly invested in getting out of here as fast as possible. Pete leans over to me, whispering, "The door outside and the amphitheater doors are on the same wall, but there's no structure on the outside that could fit that." I notice this as well and walk outside the mansion and then back inside. Pete, yeah? Don't think about it. I guess that's the best bet, Pete said, just frowning at me. I give a final examination of the place, and before we kill the last of the lights, I do have to say the place looked nice. The white marble floor was polished to the point where I can see my reflection. The gash is sealed up nice and neat, and it just looks like a vein of marble now. Everything is looking perfect inside. The walls, the ceiling, the floor. I give a little nod to Saint Denia and head to the door as the lights are taken down. I do my head count, and once again, I'm short one Honduran. I walk back inside to find Chavez kneeling in front of the statue of Saint Denia, only the lights from the setting sun reflecting off the floor to light his room. "Chavez, end of the day, let's go." "I'm staying," he said simply. I noticed the bottle that Timothy handed him is empty. "Did you drink that? Do you even know what that is, Chavez?" I said, a bit shocked. "It's God's blessing." Chavez stood up and he just looked, for lack of a better word, happy, like a man without a care in the world. "I'm not leaving you here, Chavez. The client isn't going to like you hanging around." Timothy chimed in about that time, walking back from behind the barrier. Actually, Chavez agreed to assist me in a few things going forward. I turned to look at Timothy. "You ever think I might not want to lose a member of my crew?" Chavez spoke up then. "Mr. Fred, it's okay. I want to stay. I want to stay and help Timothy interrupted him quickly. He volunteered. It's hard to say no to him. I gave Chavez a look. "Nice working with you, Fred," he said, extending a hand. I ignored it. "Get your head on straight. I'm your ride." "I'm staying, Fred." I turn and shout, "Chavez, I'm not staying here 1 minute longer, okay? I'm out. Done. Finished." I stopped for a second, because I didn't say finished. I said finito, but for some reason, It came out as English. I'm 100% done with this place, okay? I'm out. Job's done. You want to stay? Enjoy. I head towards my truck, look to my toolbox, ensure nothing else has found its way in there, and close it and get ready to go. As I head out the door, Timothy starts to close them behind me, him and Chavez still inside. Timothy looks to me before he closes the door. The remainder of your payment is in the truck. Everything we discussed. I cannot fully express my gratitude. He shuts the door, and we load up. I check the truck, and there's an envelope with the second half of the payment in it. I'm pretty shocked, and I count the bills a few times. It's up to 10 grand. I've heard of getting a tip, but this was a bit overkill. I know one pair of kids whose college funds are going to be in a good place after all of this. At home, I'm doing the husband thing, cleaning up the dishes from the wife's dinner. Sandy and the boys are asleep, and that's when I hear the crash in the garage. I run to the closet, grab the shotgun, and fill it with a few shells before I run in. I'm kind of expecting him at this point. The toolbox and all the tools are strewn about on the floor. I see my garage door open slightly, and suddenly something small and almost glass-like hits me in the face. I look down to see what looks like a chunk of the object that was in my toolbox, about the size of a $50, land on the floor. That is but a pittance, Red Fred. I turn to the voice and see glowing yellow eyes in the darkness. Not nearly what I needed. I pull the gun and go to shoot, but I feel a tug against my entire body as if someone grabbed onto my sweatshirt from the front and pulled me downward. I barely take a step forward, but it's enough to get me to point the gun at the floor. I look up as Belial's hand drops from midair, steam rising off the black rings on his finger. Weak. Not this weak, though. Another hissing laugh. He offered you protection. How noble. Before I can take aim, a tool shoots out from the workbench and smacks into the shotgun, which lands a few feet from me. I lunge for it, but it suddenly leaps off the floor and into Belial's hand. He takes the shotgun and places it against his shoulder, looking down at me. As if this little bauble could do anything against me. I try to get up, but he places a foot on my shoulder and I can't move. You've done something very foolish, Red Fred. You've hidden the only thing that can help me move up from a puppeteer to a god. The shotgun barrels now slide under my chin, and I see Belial's face illuminated by the light coming from the doorway. But there's hope for you yet. I was shaken at this point. I'm not sure how the tables had turned so fast. You can fix your mistake, and in return, I'll spare you and your family's lives. His voice wheezes, but not as much as it did before. He somehow seems a little stronger. Despite how I look, I've done quite a bit to exist in this world. Possessions, normally a lesser demon's game, but the discovery of that sanguine amber, I could not resist. He cocks the shotgun threateningly. I'm sweating and slowly trying to get to my feet. I'm on my hands and knees by the time I feel the barrels at the back of my head. Now, this is your next course of action. You will leave here right away and retrieve for me the sanguine amber you found. You will bring it back here. You will give it to me. In return, you will be at my side rather than in my path. I swear I can hear his grin somehow. Nod if you understand. I just nod. What else can I do? If you do not bring me the amber, if you do not return home, if you somehow reach out to Timothy for aid, I will go upstairs and I will make your children watch as I violate your wife in every way that you can and cannot imagine. You lay one hand on her and you'll what, mortal? I hear the safety slide off. You'll bleed for me? I relax as I hear the safety slide back on, the gun clattering to the floor. You're on the clock, Freddy. I look up and the garage is clean. The door isn't open. There isn't even a sign that I dropped the shotgun, as it's sitting neatly on my workbench. I get to my feet, shaking, and turn to see a figure right behind me, causing me to shout in fear. Sandy's behind me, and she punches me in the shoulder. Jesus, it's just me. Why are you so jumpy, Fred? What's going on? I rub my shoulders where she nailed me and try to figure out how best to protect my one family from someone who is clearly not of this world. That's when I remember what Timothy handed me at the worksite. I rush to the closet to find my coat. Were you on the phone? I thought I heard you talking to someone, Sandy asked. I pulled the bottle out of my coat and turned to her, pressing the bottle into her hand. Sandy, I know how this is gonna sound, but I need you to drink this and share it with the boys, okay? They're asleep, Fred, she said curtly. She looked at the bottle and raised an eyebrow. This isn't some random point where you poison us all and run off to Malibu with some bimbo, is it? I grab her by the shoulders and look her dead in the eye. I'm asking you to trust me. Just drink half the bottle. Split the rest between the kids, okay? I need you to do that for me now. Just drink half. Sandy's clearly worried now, but she undoes the clasp on the bottle. Okay, Fred, all right, calm down. She takes a swig, then another until the bottle's half empty and caps it. So I drank it. What? She trails off and suddenly closes her eyes, opening them again and looking right into mine. Oh, wow. It's probably the best water I've ever drank. Make sure you give the boys some, okay? I left something on the work site and I need to go get it. She just nods. Love you, Fred. Love you too, I said, letting go of her shoulder. Just make sure the kids drink that and keep the doors locked. Don't let anybody in, okay? Okay, Fred, she said with a nod. Be careful. She walked up the stairs, smiling serenely as I rushed out the door, locking it behind me to make my way to my truck. In retrospect, I should have kissed her. I was driving fast enough to be a little worried, but not fast enough to be pulled over. I got to the gate of the worksite in roughly an hour, which was pretty good time from my house. I saw the gate wasn't chained up anymore, which seemed odd because Timothy had to undo that chain every morning. Did he never leave the mansion after he closed those doors for the day? I hit my brights as I drove down the driveway, knowing it might be dark in that main hallway, and ran to the door. Timothy, open up! I slammed my fist on the door. Damn it, Timothy, open the damn door! I looked to see there was no padlock on the door, and jostled the old doorknob, swinging the door open. Chavez, Timothy, I shouted into the empty room, expecting an echo, but I heard no sound. This musty scent hits me then, the smell of rotten wood and mildewed fabric. I look around, pulling out my flashlight. The boards are letting light in from the front. There's no statues, no marble floor, just a set of collapsed staircases and a rotting subfloor with a few ripped rugs and some graffiti. I took a step outside just to confirm it was the right place, then peeked back in. The barricades were gone, the marble ceilings, the floors, the walls. It's as if it had never been there. I ran through the ruins of that ancient mansion. The mansion was mundane, old, too ruined to be fixed. It should have been knocked down. I try a door or two, each opening to rotting rooms. I eventually became overwhelmed with the fungus in the air as I stumbled out of the door, falling to my knees near my car. As I tried to catch my breath, I tried to figure out what the hell was going on. I turned to look at the old mansion behind me, and I could only think of one thing. The site we were working on was gone, or was never there in the first place, and the amber was gone with it. I was panicked. I wasn't even sure what to do. Timothy was a don't-ask customer, so I had no contact information saved. No way to reach him, not even a cell number. That's when I realized I did have some hope. I got back into the truck and hauled ass to my office. I could get there in about 20 minutes, and I could check the caller ID, maybe reach him that way. I zipped out the long driveway and got moving as fast as possible, leaving the gate open. I didn't even think I closed the door to the old mansion, come to think of it. I got to the office in just under 15 minutes. I fumbled with the lock, having to stop myself for a second, and then calmly getting my key in the slot. I pulled the door open and rushed to my desk. I hit the call history on the phone and finally got a number. Out of state, of course, but it was from New York, which was fine. Probably the right number. I hit the speed redial while jotting the number down. My stomach dropped when it went directly to voicemail. I heard the message on the other end. "You've reached Major Timothy Crestfall. Please leave a message and I'll get back with you shortly. Godspeed." I hadn't even caught my breath by the time the beep occurred. "Timothy, please, you need to call me. Belial's threatening my family, my wife and kids, man. I gave them the water you gave me, but this guy, I don't think..." I couldn't believe I was going to say this out loud. Might even make it real. "I don't think he's human. Help me, please." I hung up and tried to call again. Direct to voicemail. Random thoughts ran past my frantic mind. He's a bit young looking for an officer, ain't he? My cell phone rings. It's a 1-800 number of some sort, calling me in the middle of the night. I was about to ignore it, but something told me I shouldn't. I answered the phone. "This is Fred, who's this?" There's a crackle on the other end. I think I hear something like a scream before it cuts out entirely. A young man's on the line. Sounds shaken. "Sir, are you Mr. Fred McCarran?" "Yeah, who's this?" "This is your home alarm central monitoring, sir. We're getting alerts that multiple smoke detectors have alarmed in your home. We've connected to the fire department, but we're not able to reach anyone via the front panel in your house. Are you home at the moment, sir?" I felt a little dizzy, but I stood up regardless and tried to make it to the car. "Oh God, have you tried my wife's cell phone?" "Yes, sir. We've attempted multiple times. Are you home?" No, I ain't home." "The fire department's on the way, sir. Do you need me to stay on the line with you?" "No, I'm going home." I jumped out of the office, leaving it unlocked and getting back in the truck. At this point, I didn't give a damn about the speed limit. I put the pedal to the floor. I'm not even paying attention to the speedometer until I look in the rear view and see the police following me. I pull over, shaken, not even sure what's going on. What happened to my family? I keep thinking that they're going to be alright, that I gave the holy water stuff to them, and that they're going to be alive, and what did Chavez call that stuff? God's blessing? I heard a tap against my window, and I rolled it down quickly. The cop is gruff-looking, heavy-set guy. "In a hurry?" My voice cracks as I try to compose myself. "Officer, I just got a message from my alarm company. There's a smoke alarm going off at my house. I got about 20 minutes to get there. I need to pass on this." The officer puts his hand out. "License, sir." I curse and hand him my license. I hear him actually running to his car. I contemplated just speeding off right then and there. Scenarios going through my head of him shooting out my tires or turning the entire thing into a police chase. My train of thought is broken when he runs back to my window and gives me my license. "Follow me. Try to keep up, sir." "What?" I'm confused by this point. "I'm giving you an escort." I think I went pale at that point. The cop put his hand on my shoulder. "Sir, do you need me to give you a lift?" I looked at my shaking hand and just nodded dumbly. He opened the truck's door and took out the keys. He undid my seatbelt. Before I know what was going on, we're in the squad car, speeding down the street with the sirens blaring. I hear the radio chatter coming in and out, but I can barely understand it. He grabs his radio. "Car 314, I've got a resident of 35 Locust Street en route to the scene." The scene? I'm still in disbelief. I can barely tell when we're on my street, and the car finally slows down after it's done running every red light and every stop sign on the way there. The car comes to a stop, and I scramble out. I'm half blinded by a sea of emergency vehicles, ambulance, fire, other cops. I think briefly that at least the alarm system did something after 10 years of monthly subscriptions. The heavy-set officer's already out and parting the onlookers in front of me, stepping past the caution tape. He says something to the other officer, and I wander onto my front lawn. I stagger onto the lawn and see something smoldering. It's the remains of my house. Firefighters are working to put out the fire, but I look around frantically, trying to spot Sandy and the boys. I eventually found them. 3 body bags out on the lawn, sealed, 2 smaller forms inside, and another that reminds me of my wife when she would hide under the sheets. I feel pain in my knees suddenly. Apparently, I fell. I need a pair of hands on my shoulders, another roughly handling my arms and hefting me back up. My legs barely function as I'm led to the back of the ambulance. The heavy-set officer helps me sit down in the back. Through the white noise, I see a very bright light in my face, and a voice slowly coming through. Can you hear me, sir? There's a young woman in front of me with a stethoscope. I blink, finally shaking my head. Yeah. She moves the bright light back and forth, and I start to come out of it. I look to the pavement. They didn't make it out, did they? Her tone is empathetic, but practiced. I'm sorry, no. We did everything we could, but by the time the fire department was even able to reach them, it was too late. I did my best not to just burst into tears, but they came anyway. I suppress a sob and try to swallow it down. I blink a few tears out of my eyes and hear the female EMT walk away. I hear a few male voices approaching and look up. That him? Okay, I'll take it from here. You guys fall back. This might get ugly, you know. I shake my head, knocking a few tears out. Cops are going to be asking me questions. I need to be composed. I dry my eyes, but it isn't working. I feel the ambulance shift slightly as someone sits next to me. Mr. Marcone? I nod, eyes still downcast. I'm Detective Benjamin. I've got a few questions to ask, mostly about your whereabouts when the fire started. He holds out a battered pack of cigarettes, offering me one, and I take it, accepting a light, before taking in a deep breath of that healing nicotine. I'm about to say something when I think how odd that name sounds. I hear a wheezing snicker, and the voice changes to one I'm all too familiar with. I'm kidding, Freddy. I know where you were. My head snaps to the left. It's Belial. He's sitting right next to me. Black hair slicked back above his pale face, yellow eyes, and 2 white teeth. His duster's still white, but in addition to the red tie, he has a police ID badge hanging from around his neck. I clench my fist, grip my teeth, but before I can stand to deck him, his hand is on my fist, and he's hushing me, pulling my hand down. Shh. I'm just delivering on a promise, Red Fred. I try to push against his hand, but it doesn't budge. Stop calling me that. We all call you that, Red Fred. You should get used to it. But I have to give you some kudos, Freddy. That's a dirty trick. The hell are you talking about? His grin seems to return somewhat. When I couldn't pull you towards me, I assume you drunk some of that sanctified water from the Guardian Temple. The Guardian Temple? Belial snickers, almost hissing. The place you were cleaning, Freddy. He took a deep breath, wheezing at his next words. As I said, you surprised me, giving your only protection against me to your family. Smarter than I took you for. I glared daggers at him, even with tears in my eyes. You see, Fred, normally what I would have done would have been to march up to your kid's bedroom, wake them up, and then take them to Mommy. I'd then torture her relentlessly until she forsakes you and the kids, and then promise her that in the end, her pain would stop in exchange for her soul. Chills ran down my spine when I heard him say that. He noticed, and this seemed to make him even happier. The strong ones resist, right up until I threaten to put the children through the same pain I'm putting her through. His grin, it's ear to ear and sickening. Then I take her soul in exchange for the safety of her children. Once that's mine, I remove the love she holds for her family, for God, make her just one of my little whores, and then she usually just kills the kids on her own. You know, for fun. He lights his own cigarette. I can feel the horror just washing over me. It almost never fails. Works at least 9 times out of 10. But you, Fred, you robbed me of a good time. You see, normally, if you drink a half bottle of that holy water, you're protected from possession and the like. But what you did, Fred, giving them your protection selflessly, that bumped the potency up, and it was something fierce. He shows me his left hand, the skin on his palm almost entirely black, his hand shriveled and shaking. One of the rings even falls off his finger and shatters when it hits the ground. He curses in some unknown guttural language as it happens. "You see what happened when I reached out and grabbed your wife's arm, don't you, Fred? Burn like a bitch. Still feel it burning, actually. So, with me being unable to touch him, I had to take some more mundane methods of keeping my promise. Broke the doorknobs, nailed a few windows down, made sure they didn't get out as I burned the place down from top to bottom. You protected your family from me, but the house, that was a very different story." I'm gritting my teeth, staring daggers at Belial as he seems to be enjoying telling me all of this. His tone changed then, suddenly and fiercely. "I've never had to end someone like that. It's so mundane, so dull, and knowing that their souls were saved as I did it." Smoke spewed from his nostrils as he huffed and wheezed. "What a nasty taste you leave in my mouth, Fred." Smoke spews from his nostrils as he huffs and wheezes. He looks like he wants to say more, but instead he just stands. "But you've been through enough today. I'll let you live for now. Unless you want to make it easier on everyone and just, you know." He slides a finger across his throat. The message, "not wasted." "Might be nice to do something ironic, you know. There's a tire swing in the backyard. Could hang yourself from it." He speaks, and I feel kinda woozy and confused. "Maybe at the motel, take your toaster and take a shower with it." I shake my head. It feels like someone's shoving cotton in my ears, and I can only just hear his voice over the background noise. He breathes on in my ear now. "When you think about it, what sort of man can't even protect his family? The only honorable way out is to remove yourself from the equation." Suddenly, he's gone, and I can think clearly again. The EMT is back, and she starts taking my vitals. I'm gazing up at the night sky, and I've got no idea what I'm gonna do. I feel like a passenger in my own body as the next week goes by. I work out details with funeral directors and lawyers and insurance companies. I get tired of hearing the words, "sorry for your loss." I'm bouncing between absolute sorrow and blind in anger, and I can't control which family members I snap at or sob in front of. By the time the funeral day comes, it's me and a few friends and family on my wife's side. I'm in a church, first time in years, and the organ's playing a sad old dirge while I sit on the front pew alone. My family wants little to do with me. Half of them think I burned the house down in a triple homicide. The news was leaked somehow about how the windows were nailed shut and the doorknobs were removed before being locked. I'm pretty shocked when someone in a rather nice suit and some pretty powerful cologne sits next to me. "We only just heard," says a pretty thick Latin accent, but it's a familiar one. I look up to see Chavez. Chavez, of all people, sitting next to me. He's wearing a pretty expensive tailored suit, too. "Chavez?" He points to a necklace of some kind around his neck. Temple charm. Helps you understand me, even when we're outside of it. I sit up, looking him over, extremely confused. "Why are you here? Where the hell is Timothy?" Chavez frowns. "He's here, but I told him not to come to you yet. I know you blame him for this." "No shit, Chavez." I looked around the church before Chavez put his hand on my shoulder. "Where is he?" Chavez shook his head. "Now isn't the time, Fred." I was glaring at him. "So what? You're his lackey now?" I stare ahead at the 3 caskets, all closed. "What the hell is he?" "Not what we both thought," was all Chavez could say. We're both quiet for some time before Chavez decides to piss me off again. "I know how you feel." I glare at him. I'm out of tears at this point. I'm just in an angry mood right now. "You know how I feel. Sandy and the boys didn't deserve this. She was an amazing woman, and the boys were good kids. They didn't deserve this, and it's because of me getting mixed up with Timothy's bullcrap, or whatever it was. So don't give me that I know how you feel nonsense. You don't have a clue. Chavez was silent as he looked ahead at the caskets. When I was in Honduras, I helped the cartels smuggle drugs past the border. I would build chairs and tables and the like. They hide the coke in them, and I made the trapdoors. One day, my trapdoors all started to get found. One day, the cartel comes to me, and they tell me that they're going to try something new. They want me to make crucifixes and hide the drugs in them. They tell me the drugs won't be found as easy because people won't check crucifixes. He makes a sign of the cross over his heart as he says it. I refuse. I tell them I'm going to leave. I promise not to tell the police, but I tell them I'm done. The next day, I wake up with a bag on my head. I think they're going to kill me, you know? I make my peace with God and accept my fate. They bring me to a river. Along with it, they have my mother and my father, my wife, my daughter, all lined up. His normally happy face turns mournful. They don't even give me a chance. They execute my family in front of me, throw them in the river. They tell me, you live for the cartel, or you die for the cartel. I just looked away at that point. Chavez leaned back in his pew, now looking at me. You get to bury your family, Fred. Be happy for that. I'll never have that right. It was stolen from me. I turned back to him. His story is probably worse than my own. Not that I'm weighing tragedies or anything. Chavez, you never answered me. Why are you even here right now? Chavez looked around as if searching for someone. Fred, you always helped me out. You gave me a job, gave me a ride to my place when I needed it. I'm here because I'm your friend. As a man, I usually leave crying for the macho stuff, Grand Canyons and funerals and the like. I guess this was an exception, though. Of all the people who'd show up when I needed them, if you told me it would be George Chavez, the illegal immigrant who's the best guy I know with a sandblaster, I'd have never believed you. Now I'm sobbing next to a guy, and he's doing his best to comfort me. Chavez even volunteered to be a pallbearer at the end of the ceremony. At the graveyard, he's the last one to stand with me. I turn to him, and I'm still swinging between deep depression and seething anger. Chavez, how can you still believe in God? He took everything from you, and yet you're still so faithful. Chavez starts to unbutton his jacket as he talks. When the cartel killed my family, they forced me to be their runner. One day, during a drop, I see a hole in the border fence to America. I think to myself, I can live in the cartel, or I can die free. I prayed to God and asked him to protect me during my escape. Then I ran. He reveals his chest. There's a hole just below his rib cage, on the right, and it looks like a bullet wound. It missed my heart, it missed my lungs, it didn't even hit a bone. It's a 1 in a million shot. It's a miracle, Fred. God protected me. That's why you should thank him every day. He tapped the scar as if for emphasis. Thank him? Chavez, where was he when Sandy and the boys needed help? Where was God? Why didn't he help them? Did you ask him for help, Fred? Chavez looked me dead in the eye as he buttoned up his shirt. I'm silent and just stare ahead of me, past the graves. It can't possibly be that simple, I tell myself. That whole ask and you shall receive nonsense. After a while, Chavez leaves my side. A few minutes later, I hear someone walking up behind me. I look, still facing ahead, and see Timothy in a black trench coat and a suit with a black tie. You got some balls, man, I said curtly. I never intended for this. What you did to protect them was, well, it was beyond what I thought you could do. He had said it with a smile, but now it faded off his face. If I had known you had a family, I'd have given you some other tools. I turned and marched right up to him, despite that he didn't flinch at my gaze. Yeah, your tools were really useful. I gave my wife and my boys that sacred water, and it just gave them a quicker death. It saved their souls, Fred. Because of you, your wife's soul isn't in the possession of Belial. Neither are your children's. Bullshit! That's not how that shit works. You don't lose your soul if a demon possesses you. Sometimes you die, but I know enough about that shit to know that you're just bullshitting me. I talked to the friggin' priest. You think Belial is a demon? I took a step back. Well, what else could he be? Timothy's face didn't change expressions in the least. Belial was the first dark angel, long ago. He was tasked with punishing impure souls. That was before the war, though. Timothy looked at the sky. I looked up there with him. What war? The war between the cherubim and the seraphim. The cherubim were a high order of angels, created by God to be his servants. But they allied themselves with Lucifer. The war began when Belial talked Lucifer into defying God in the first place. I was pretty dumbfounded at this point. I looked at the graves of my family for a moment. Why does such a big shot from down below give a crap about anything that happens here? The amber you spoke of, it has enormous power. Power enough where if Belial got his hands on it, he'd be able to pull himself into our world. Pull himself? Newsflash, Timothy, he's already here. Timothy shook his head. Belial is only possessing a man now. That's why the first day he didn't just kill you and take the amber. The man he had possession of was still resisting him, still fighting. At that stage of early possession, a spirit cannot make someone do something they don't wish to do. It wasn't until the next day when his will faltered and Belial gained full control. Still, even in full control, only a wisp of his power can go through the vessel. Timothy gave an odd smile to that. Belial, with the amber, would have brought himself into this world completely, and as a full-powered cherubim, would have laid waste to everything. So, Fred, he said, beaming at me, you saved the world in keeping it from him. I looked away from Timothy, not knowing how to feel about that. Yeah, it only cost my family their lives. Their souls are safe. And Belial's still out there. He's still gonna mess with me, isn't he? I imagine he's none too pleased that you protected your family from him. He's likely going to continue tormenting you. Plan on doing anything about it? Or am I gonna have to get a spot next to Sandy here for my protection? Do you plan on asking? I turned, my face turning red, but I just didn't have the energy for it. Please, Timothy, help me get rid of this thing. Don't ask me. Timothy turned away from me and started walking again. Who the hell do I ask? I shouted. Timothy ignored me and continued to walk away. I turned to face the graves again, maybe get a hint. I looked around and cleared my throat. Hey, God, mind giving me a hand here? Chavez's hand was on my shoulder suddenly. Do you know how to ask, Fred? I shook my head and Chavez just smiled. I'll show you. He got on his knees and started. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. I slowly got to my knees and repeated. Chavez whispered next to me, now ask, and in the end, say Amen. Chavez got up and left after that. Still on my knees, feeling rather awkward, I continued. God, I know I'm kind of a stranger these days, but I need help. This Belial guy, he's killed my family. I need justice. Help me get rid of him. I hoped that was enough and finished with Amen. Suddenly, there was a deep voice above me. Fred Marcone. I looked up, seeing only the silhouette of a male figure above me. Suddenly, I was pulled up onto my feet, and I saw several officers as well as the detective who had said my name. The guy looks like an off-season weightlifter who's been shoved into a detective's uniform. He was bald, and his voice was deeper than I'm used to hearing on somebody. You're under arrest for suspicion of murder, arson, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Great. As far as last words before being arrested went, I guess those were pretty lame. I let him cuff me, and as I'm led away from my family's graves, I spot him. He's dressed in his usual white duster and red tie, wearing his police badge again. The detective yells, "Hey Ben, we got your collar. You were right. He did hang around here longer than everyone else." Belial smiled as he greeted his fellow officers. "Good work. Didn't think he'd be hard. He sure did leave a lot of evidence behind." He smiled at me, using his false human voice as he spoke to the other officers. "We're gonna have a lot of fun with you." Thanks, God, I think to myself as I'm being shoved into a squad car. I look out the window and see the detective walk away with Belial. Then Timothy comes out from behind a nearby tree. Timothy stares Belial down, and Belial turns to face him. They contrast each other oddly. Timothy in his black trench coat and Belial in white. Not the right matchup, I think. They say a few things to each other, though I'm not really sure what they say. "Leave" is what I can make out from Timothy. Belial seems to laugh, but I can't hear what he's saying. All I can do is watch his lips as he says "mother" at some point. Timothy seems to narrow his eyes and get serious. "Kick his ass, Timothy," I think to myself, as I watch with bated breath as the two square off in the graveyard. Timothy seems calm and collected, Belial grinning ear to ear. I look back and forth between the two, and my heart skips a beat with what happens next. Belial makes a sudden step towards Timothy in a rapid, jerky motion, and then falls back where he was. Timothy flinches, causing Belial to laugh, before turning away and walking back to an unmarked car with the other detectives. Great, I think to myself. My guardian angel's a wuss. I was pulled out of the squad car in my Sunday best and led into the police station. Fingerprinted? Great. Mugshot? Awesome. Pat down? Man, this day was going great. I started it off burying my family, only to get arrested for their murder in the evening. The pat down was a bit odd, to say the least. The officer doing the work stopped at my coat pocket, didn't pull anything out, and just waved me by after removing my wallet. I'm finally plopped into an interview room. There's a little two-way mirror and about a 2-foot square table. 3 chairs, counting mine, of course. I noticed they were bolted down, which I'm sure they didn't want folks pulling a full-blown Jerry Springer when they're being interrogated. I try to contemplate how I wound up here, thinking about where everything's been going lately, and I try to think of a way to convince this detective who's arrested me that his partner isn't exactly what he seems. It would have to be something good, because I'm not even sure it could work. I think of scenario after scenario where, if he was convinced, what would happen? I know Belial can move objects. I saw that firsthand. Something tells me that if I hadn't been handed a highly sacred object, he'd have been able to pull me too. If I blew his cover, would he just kill us and everyone in the station? Or worse, would he kill his partner, a la Darth Vader force choke, and spin another frame job on me? Should I even count Belial as a he, or should I just be using it? Despite all of this, I'm feeling oddly calm when I see both of them walking into the room. The black detective sits down and clicks on a recording device which is embedded in the wall. "So, Mr. Marcone, I'm Detective Aaron Brown. We just want to ask a few questions, and then we can all go about our day." I look to Belial, who is letting his partner do the talking now. I'll be happy to answer them, but I'll say this much. I didn't murder my family. Detective Brown just nods and smiles. Of course. He looks down at the file folder, pulling out a piece of paper. "So, the day of the event concerning your family's tragic demise, where were you?" Belial is smiling wickedly. "I was visiting a work site, and then my office. I was looking for some equipment I had left behind." I said it plainly, and not entirely lying after all. This work site. How far from your house was it?" Detective Brown continued. "About an hour," I said simply. "And why in the middle of the night did you feel the need to check your equipment? Why couldn't it wait till morning?" I didn't have a decent answer for that one, and I tried to think of something that wouldn't immediately put both Belial and Detective Brown at odds with me. I wanted to try and survive this interview without being in jail, which seemed unlikely at this point. "Well, your demon-possessed partner over there sent me to get an unholy object, or else he was going to slaughter my entire family. While truthful, would probably make me sound nuts. Despite that being the truth, I decided to stick with my lie. I was afraid it might get stolen, and it was pretty expensive. Well, that makes sense. What piece of equipment was it, if you don't mind me asking? Of all the cops in all the world, I get the one competent bastard that can smell BS from a mile away, don't I? Remember, folks, get your lie straight before you get in the hot seat. It was a sandblaster, actually. Fairly large one, too. At least a couple of grand for that, right? Wouldn't look too good on the old expense report if it went missing, the very accurate detective asked. I nodded. I had a good idea where he was going with this line of questioning, but I was hoping he didn't get there. This job was on Monday and Tuesday, about 2 weeks ago, right? I nodded. Very interesting. And why is that so interesting, Aaron? Belial objected. Detective Brown turned back to me. Feel free to explain why I find that interesting, Mr. Marcone. Because my schedule at the office don't say nothing about a job that day. I was hoping my honesty might be appreciated, but no such luck. The detective banged his pen on the table 3 times. Ding, 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 we have a winner. He leans over to me, getting uncomfortably close over the table. Your usual crew also doesn't say you had a job that day. I say what I'm about to say, knowing I'm going to start treading into some deep water. There was a job, but the client preferred to be non-public. Non-public, Detective Brown playfully smiles. You know, every time I get a prick like you, one of these I can't be culpable if I don't know what's happening assholes, you always have another word for confidential. On the down low, under the table, discreet, exclusive, but non-public. Why, that's a nice way of putting, my client is probably dealing with some criminal nonsense, and I don't want to know about it. The detective leaned back in his chair. What do you say to that, Mr. Marcone? Am I in the ballpark? I'm quiet now, waiting, and when I glance at Belial, I catch his stupid grin. I'm starting to sweat, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. We had some forensics accounting done on your business, Mr. Marcone. Pretty preliminary stuff, you know. It should have gone under about a year ago, or, at the very least, you should have fired someone. Belial now interjected. Now, dealing in a few jobs under the table here and there isn't a big deal, but $100,000? That's a shitload of extra stuff under the table. Detective Brown finished slyly. I looked at Belial. That's not how much I have in my business, at least not in the bank. Timothy's case was the biggest score I'd had in months, and this year the under-the-table stuff didn't come close to making up the difference. Not between all the expenses, equipment, and so on and so forth. Did Belial do something? I literally have no idea what you're talking about. So you don't know where the payment of over 30 grand came from in the past month. Say the cash we found in an envelope was a thank you letter that wasn't on your books, but was definitely a payment. Such a nice letter, too. Must have done him a hell of a favor. Admittedly, he had me there. With everything going on the way it was, I never had time to properly handle the cash I got from Timothy's job. Normally, I'd make sure to pay out a bonus or two, buy some equipment, pay off some bills, always careful to use that under-the-table money first. I suddenly had an epiphany, because maybe Belial didn't do anything but crunching the numbers of what I had done this year. I did have 2 cleanups, but they weren't as high profile, but they did overpay by quite a bit. I'm sweating more as I'm thinking about whether or not I'm a good person after all. Here I am thinking about how my money laundering didn't go over so well, and I think the average kid dealing weed on the street corner should go to jail or get a better job. That should account for this year alone, and our guys are sifting through your books as we speak. We're finding quite a few gaps, bills and payments made that never should have been, and somehow, I don't think your non-public client would appreciate us digging through your dirty laundry. Might get ugly for you, especially if you're on the outside. That's the stick. Now this guy's gonna offer the carrot. Of course, we could just skip all that. If you can tell me honestly, what happened to your wife and kids? Why the doorknobs were found removed, and why the windows were nailed shut? I'm quiet while I think about it, trying to find a way out. But then I hear Belial's human voice. Aaron, why don't you step out? Have a coffee. I'll turn that thing off and have a word or two with him. Detective Brown looked at Belial. Ben, I can't have another charge against you for roughing someone up in interrogation. It's okay, Aaron. Just step out for a sec. I'll be fine, Belial said with a nod. Detective Brown stood up and left the room. I'm pretty sure about half of all that was normal good cop, bad cop setup. But with Belial alone, I'm pretty sure the good cop, satanic cop game was about to be played. Belial wheezes in his normal voice. "That was dull and boring, wasn't it? Do they still do the chair here, or is it just lethal injection?" He leans back in his chair as he asked. I narrowed my eyes at him, but said nothing. "Lethal injection is fun. A lot can go wrong. You can feel your heart and your lungs start to shut down sometimes." I adjust myself nervously in my seat and suddenly feel something in my jacket pocket. My hands discreetly check it while Belial leans back in his seat, looking to the ceiling lights. It's round, cold, and I feel a cap. I try to hide my excitement. It's the same type of bottle that Sandy and the kids drank. I wonder what it would do if I doused him with it. I also wonder how it even got in my pocket. But I'm much more concerned with what it's going to do for me here and now. "You know, beheadings were technically more painless." Belial looks back at me, his eyes on me again. "I miss beheadings." He moves his now healed left hand up to his temple, resting his head on his hand. I notice he's only sporting 3 of the black rings, and I remember how one crumbled away after he touched my wife. "Hangings, too. Nothing beats when the rope doesn't snap the neck, and you're just left behind strangling on the rope, all while you piss and crap yourself in front of a crowd." Now or never, I think, and I thump the cap off the bottle. "Shut up!" Belial gazes at me, taken aback. "What if I don't, Red Fred?" I remember what my mother used to say whenever she felt she was dealing with things possessed in the house. Normally it was a dryer on the fritz or a bird that somehow managed to get in, but the phrase rang pretty clearly in my head for some reason the second the bottle was opened in my pocket. I hoped I wasn't going to look like a complete moron if this didn't work. I splashed the contents of the bottle on my hand first, and then in his face. I made sure I got every one of those damn rings covered in the water too. While I did, I shouted, "In the name of Jesus Christ, get thee behind me!" Steam erupted from his rings, and he gasped suddenly in intense pain. He choked as he inhaled the rising steam from his hands. He stood up quick and pressed himself against the wall, and he began to flail as if he couldn't breathe. I kept splashing him and got a bit on myself in the process, but I was a bit too frantic at this point. I remember every time I saw an exorcism flick, they start chanting, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, leave this man," interjected with a few, "The power of Christ compels you." If not for the apparently seizing man across from me, I would have likely looked ridiculous. Belial was wheezing and hacking, his rings having broken and crumbled to the ground. I feel like I'm missing something serious in all this, because he's still right in front of me, his yellow eyes swirling and glaring at me. I can almost hear his voice in my head saying, "When I get through with this, I'm gonna murder you." I'm pretty sure I'm just pissing him off, but he's definitely weakened. I took the bottle and I noticed something was written on it. Maybe a parable? I splashed Belial one more time and read the bottle, then give my own grin to him and read the writing on the top. "Most glorious Prince of Presence, Saint Enoch, the knower of secrets, heavenly scribe, the governor of the world, expel from this cursed flesh the fallen before me." After the words left my lips, I felt a little dizzy. I'm not sure if it's because I just might have successfully cast off an all-powerful demon prince, or because I'm being tackled by Detective Brown. Either way, when I hit the floor, I'm completely winded and not sure if I can keep chanting. "What in the hell did you just do to my partner?" Detective Brown states. From this point on, things have gone far too south far too quickly. Maybe he did just go for a coffee and come back to see his partner being doused in what looked like acid from the outside. Both of us are distracted, however, as the screams coming from Belial change pitch. Suddenly they go higher, shrieking, and I watch his mouth open unnaturally wide as his head points upward. His back arches unnaturally, arms stiffening at his sides as he begins to shake. The form of a man crawls out of his open mouth, naked from the waist up. His eyes are yellow and black, swirling with smoke. His form is translucent. His brow is furrowed and a long black hair seems to float over him as if he's underwater. His face, his body, his arms, his hands, every part of him looks physically perfect, as if some male fitness model had just appeared out of this guy's mouth. His form grows. It fills the room, moving over the ceiling as I notice a pair of black wings appear to be on either side of him. They look like black flames. The flames rise from each wing and seem to make the room hotter. Ash falls from the bottom of each. The wings are so large they fill the entire room and block off the exit. I'm suddenly hit with a strong scent of sulfur, and the shrieking from the physical body of Benjamin grows louder. Belial's left hand reaches out towards me, his teeth gritted. "Fred!" His voice hisses out louder than I had heard it before. No longer a wheeze, a vile breath reaching me, making me retch. "Not by you, you pathetic, sinful mortal!" He yells, his voice bellowing and shaking the room. "I will not be cast out by the likes of you." The room shakes even more, his hands almost reaching me. His fingers appear to turn to smoke, and his hand grabs for my chest. His wings wrap around himself. Above him, there's a more terrifying sight. A spear pierces through him from above, again translucent, a massive hand holding it. The hand is black, clawed, and seems to be scaled like a lizard. A giant lizard head pushes down from the ceiling, white glowing eyes drowning out the light of the fluorescent bulbs in the room, the most contrasting black scales along its muzzle. I can make out a pair of horns near the back of its head, but they disappear into the ceiling. I hear an unearthly roar as the spear is pulled back, and then thrust through Belial again, hitting him in the chest, right into where I assume his heart would be, if the bastard had one. Belial screamed again, his voice shaking me to my core. "No, no, do not send me back!" At this last word, there's suddenly nothing but a black ball hovering over the mouth of Belial's previous host. I see the black lizard's face open its maw, and a white light douses the little ball over Belial's form. Suddenly, all the air seems to be sucked out of the room, and I feel a massive pressure smash into me and knock me and the detective into the far wall, as the black ball seems to explode in bright white light. I hear nothing but the ringing in my ears after I hear glass shattering and the sounds of alarms blaring. Someone grabs me, hauls me out of the room. As I'm being shuffled away, dust and chaos all around me, I see Belial's body lying motionless on the floor, his partner shouting something or other to the other police officers. The officer who has me keeps pulling me away, roughly handling me. I feel weak, and I shield my eyes as I'm suddenly outside, then thrown into the back of a car. My ears barely stop ringing, and I think I've composed myself until the car starts up, speeding away, sirens blaring. I hear a Latin accent again from the front seat. "That was amazing, Fred. Good work." I look up and see Chavez wearing a policeman's cap and uniform, giving me a thumbs up. Right before I pass out, I realize that the cop who gave me the pat-down must have been Chavez. He put the water in my pocket. I begin to chuckle just before I lose consciousness. I was woken up by a knocking on the rear window. I groggily looked up to see Chavez smiling on the other side, now without the policeman's cap on. "Fred, wake up, man. Let's go." The door opened, and I was dragged out. Chavez got me to my feet, but I felt weak, and I could barely walk. "You did it, Fred. You did. Hang on a little bit longer, though." Everything started spinning. I couldn't go on, so I just fell to my knees. "St. Timothy!" Chavez shouted. "Quickly!" Before I knew what was going on, I could see Timothy rushing towards me. "You have to heal his spirit. The exorcism took a toll on him." "George, I don't know how," I heard Timothy admit. "Ask your grandmother." Chavez grabbed Timothy's hand and placed it on my forehead. Timothy took a breath, and suddenly I felt, well, better, I guess. I blinked, and my eyes started to clear. I started to get off my knees. By the time I was standing, I looked at Timothy in front of me, still wearing his trench coat, looking at his hand curiously. Chavez was thrilled. "I told you, Belial's interference wasn't enough to weaken the gift you passed on." Timothy nodded, seemingly in shock, and then looked to me. "You did well, Fred." "So, you're not an angel," I said, leaning up against the car to look at Timothy. Timothy shook his head, but Chavez protested. "He is, but he's young still. He doesn't know his own strength, Fred." "How do you know?" I asked Chavez, oddly. "Because I read, Fred. I read the Bible." He pointed to Timothy. "He's the grandson of St. Denia, daughter of Enoch." Timothy just nodded, We can talk later, Chavez. I think Fred needs to know where he is. That's your new home, Chavez said, smiling and pointing to a 2-story house. I looked around. There seemed to be a few houses sprinkled here and there, but it kind of looked like I was in the middle of nowhere. Timothy and Chavez made their way down the walkway towards the 2-story house, and I followed them. When Timothy got to the door, he knocked 3 times. Fred's here, Timothy said. The door opened, and I saw Sandy's smiling face. I ran past Chavez and Timothy and hugged and kissed her for what felt like too short a time, right up until I got a firm punch on the shoulder. Timothy and Chavez both winced. Never take a job like that again, she said. We were scared half to death. She took a deep breath. Also, we're going to start going to church, like, a lot. I thought you were dead. You and the boys, I said softly. Sandy suddenly glared at Timothy. Oh, you did? She suddenly charged at Timothy and proceeded to hammer his shoulder a few times, punctuating each hit with the word, Timothy, how dare you do that to him? Sorry, Sandy, Timothy gasped in pain. She turned around sharply and walked back towards me. The boys are playing video games, and they won't shut up about how much the internet sucks. Now get in there while I try to figure out dinner. I heard a litany of other complaints from her, from the stove to the refrigerator and the like, but they were pretty typical of Sandy. I walked inside, relieved to find my wife safe and still slightly crazy. I greeted the boys, and for the first time in weeks, I felt happy and free. After dinner, my boys challenged Chavez to some game or another, and I saw Timothy in the backyard looking over more than an acre of property that was apparently mine. The sun was setting in the distance. I walked towards him and looked over at him. So how old are you? I asked. 25, Timothy said. Jesus, I got 15 years on you, I said plainly. How exactly are you an angel? Timothy only shook his head. I'm hardly an angel. Certainly not a saint like George seems to think. So what are you then? At best, half angel, half... He looked at the sky. Monster. Care to elaborate? I'm a little done being left in the dark. So, we're breaking the no questions policy, I suppose. He smiled as he turned to me. I nodded. Yeah, 'cause I won't be doing that anymore. I was worried enough about the cops finding out what I was doing. I guess I didn't realize what else was just out there that might be interested. Timothy chuckled. To answer your question, I'm the grandson of Dina, or Enoch, who is, of course, the Metatron, the voice of God. Enoch. That's that guy I shouted about in front of Belial. Timothy nodded. Most exorcisms don't go that well. Part 1 is getting the name of the spirit infesting the body. Part 2 is ensuring you have the correct angel to get the job done. Most possessions, you can invoke Michael the Archangel, and they'll go screaming because Michael commands God's armies. Half the time, Michael will actually delegate the task to a lesser angel, but that depends on the individual faith and resolve. This can drive out more lesser demons. For Belial, however, you needed bigger guns, but a stronger resolve. That's why we needed you, seeking justice and retribution. Otherwise, you might have died. It's why I had to make you believe Belial had killed your family. It was hard, as I can't lie. So, you can't tell a lie at all? As a descendant of Enoch, it's kind of in my blood. I mean, someone who speaks for God has to lack the ability to lie, of course. I try to think of a time when Timothy lied to me, but while he withheld information, he never did lie. My family's souls were safe, that was true. He didn't even lie about the blood or how long it was there. I guess that also explained why he was such a bad haggler. That means you talk to God. The Metatron speaks to God, right? Timothy sighed and shook his head. My mother was stolen from Dinah when she was a child, stolen by none other than Belial. He corrupted her, filled her with hatred and despair. She had me with let's just say a mass murderer, a fallen prophet, one of the people who destroyed the temple we had to restore, actually. So that's the monster half then, I asked. Yes, Timothy placed his hands in his pocket. My mother left me alone with my father, so I never learned what she knew. I've never even met her. One day I ran away from him and found the entrance to the Guardian Temple. The only thing that comes naturally is my ability to do this, he said as he outstretched his hand and a pair of doors appeared in the yard out of nowhere. I looked, and inside, not well lit, was the room we used to work in, the room I had no desire to visit again. I used its gates to come to this world, joined the military, rose up in the ranks, and gained influence. Because, well, I'm going to fight my father. I'm going to stop him and his sister from destroying another world. To do that, I needed a base. I did my best, but I needed help to fix the temple up. So you called me. Timothy nodded again. I didn't lie about how I heard about you. Everything else is settled. How did you save my family? I thought they were dead. I saw the bodies. Timothy laughed. I got your message, and I did realize the mistake I'd made, that I didn't know where you or your family were. But you should thank Chavez. He knew where your address was. From there, I was able to will a gate open. I had just opened them in the basement and found your family there. Sandy is quite the smart woman, by the way. She had soaked towels and sheets and shoved them under the doors, windows, and was doing her best with the soaked blankets. She was shocked to see a pair of doors appear out of nowhere, but she ran regardless, taking the kids. From there, I was able to substitute some corpses, and Chavez and I figured a way for you to beat Belial. I raised an eyebrow. Why couldn't you defeat him? Timothy's smile weakened as he looked at my new house. I was afraid. He kicked the dirt slightly in a frustrated way. Belial manipulated my mother, stole her away from my grandmother, and nearly got his hands on something that could have ended the world, all because of my miscalculation. He's older and more powerful than anything I'm likely ever to face or to be. So it's like you thought in the car. Your guardian angel is kind of a pussy. Like I thought, I said, bewildered. Mind reading is a simple trick if you're part angel, apparently. Why me? Honestly? Timothy said, some amusement in his voice. Belial at his core is a follower of Lucifer. Like his master, he's most vulnerable when he thinks he's won the day. So, me thinking he killed my family and him tormenting me was, what, boasting? Pride cometh before a fall, as always, Timothy nodded. I shook my head. So, I get why I helped, but you couldn't call in reinforcements for a thing like Belial? Fred, I am the reinforcements, Timothy said with a smile. I felt my stomach fall a bit. What do you mean? Timothy looked at the temple entrance in front of us. Angels exist on this place because God needs them to perform miracles. God, while omnipresent, is also omniabasent. The angels serve his desires, and he directs them from time to time. Think of it as if every time God blinks, a few hundred years pass. He can also invoke his will directly from time to time when directly called upon by someone who is extremely strong in the faith. I looked to the temple doors again. So that temple, the Guardian Temple, where God's angels amass to coordinate his will, choose prophets, create miracles, led by the Metatron. So wait, I said. I recalled the blood I had seen and cleaned up. You mean they're gone, murdered by what in a sense was my aunt and father. I'm all that's left, and I'm trying to rebuild. So, for now, we need to lean on the resolve and faith of mortals like you. But now I don't feel so helpless. I feel like there's a chance, however small. Timothy looks at the open gate in a faraway way. We're losing, however. I'm not sure how long it's going to take me to recover and get the upper hand again. How long do you need? I asked, as if I could do anything. 15, maybe 20 years. Which reminds me, I need to get back to work. Chavez and I should go. We've caused you enough trouble. Chavez? Still? I laugh. What do you need him for? Timothy looks at my house again with a look of sincerity, and I see Chavez running out towards us with a plate of sliced cake to show me what I'm hopefully to become. St. Timothy, I'm coming. Also, Mrs. Marcon made you a cake. Timothy narrowed his eyes. I swear, Chavez, if it's angel food cake, Chavez said, smiling just as broadly at the pun. I groaned as Chavez handed the cake to Timothy, who, also rolling his eyes, walked towards the door. Timothy stopped before closing them. If you need me again, you have my number. The doors closed and vanished into thin air. I hope I never see you again, I said out loud, as I headed into my new home. Epilogue. It's been 10 years and I still work in restoration. On the weekends, my new crew and I check out churches in need of repair. Free of charge, of course, working on restoring their stonework and things. We did it as a charity. Nothing but raw materials are paid for. Usually the priests take up a collection via the old school plate, or we use crowdfunding websites. My new guy Devin is on the second floor of the church overlooking the center aisle, checking out a stone pillar in bad shape. Fred, this thing can't be secured. We're going to have to get some temporary supports for the roof and literally rebuild it from the ground up. Knock out the old walls, bring in the new ones, whole 9 yards. Padre's not going to be happy. Devin shouted down. He can pay for it when it's fixed, but unless God sends Mason angels, it ain't happening. Ask, and you shall receive. The priest of the church apparently had overheard us. He walked towards me. Dare I ask? I'm sure that it's expensive. I nodded. I'll get a quote together. See if we can do something, Father. And I'll call my insurance company after I pray to God to help me through the customer support robots. Priests all have terrible jokes, by the way. Something you learn when you work in multiple churches. That's about the time my tinnitus kicked in, which I've had for the past 10 years. I wish it was the normal sort, where you hear a high-pitched ringing. It's not, though. It's high-pitched screams. The sort I heard when Belial was cast out. I pull out some eardrops, which I keep in the same bottle Chavez gave me. The screaming stops pretty quick. The priest looks at the bottle for a moment. St. Enoch? Obscure. I laughed. It was a gift from a friend of mine, Timothy. The priest nods. Ah, that makes sense that his name's Timothy. Why does that make sense? I said, looking at the priest oddly. Well, my boy, Timothy means follower of God. I smile and nod. Yeah, that's him. One of the nuns runs up about that time. Father, something's happening on the news in Jerusalem. The priest turned and followed her. I followed too, my curiosity suddenly piqued. We all head to the back with a TV, 2 nuns already glued to the set. It looks like an overhead shot of a destroyed street and a headline, Terror in the Holy Land. I see a little I-24 logo in the corner. Never heard of that channel before personally. I'm sure it's just hyperbole, sisters, the priest begins. The camera pans down to a group of 5 people. 3 of the group look like they're wearing a uniform of sorts. 2 are women, both blonde, and the man is bald. They're wearing long white sleeves and black vests with matching black pants. I see another man next to them, and it's hard to make out what he's wearing. It's red and brown and black, and I swear he could be wearing a cape or something. His hair is short and white. The largest of the 5 is a massive man with long white hair braided down the left side, while the right side of his head just seems to be completely shaved. He's wearing full plate armor and a white cape with a blue accent inside of it. Suddenly the bald guy cracks his fingers, and fire spews forth from his hands like he's got a flamethrower on each palm. One of the sisters watching screams, and the priest tries to comfort her. The anchor on the TV feed chimes in. It looks like there's some kind of advanced weapons system at play, and it seems attack helicopters are being called in. Oh my God! The camera shakily changes as the white figure is suddenly in the air, and a pair of white wings have unfolded from behind him. In an instant, suddenly, something springs from the angel's back, lands in his hands, and smashes into the helicopter, destroying it in an explosion of fire before the figure flaps his wings again, blasting the debris away, and diving at the next helicopter, jabbing the object it was pulling out of the helicopter close to the camera. I lunge for the remote and hit pause on the TV. Frozen on the screen, it's clear to see that it's not a man, but an absolute monster of a woman. In her hand is a massive sword, huge and bulky, yet she seems to wield it without much effort. It looks like there's a blue Omega symbol on one of her shoulders. I recall what happened to the helicopter when she swung at it. She destroyed it in a single blow. I remember the bloodstains on the temple as my hellish tinnitus kicks in again. I remember the gash on the floor as I spot the sword on the screen. Mike's voice echoing in my mind. Looks like a clean cut. One of the nuns asks, Is that an angel? My face goes pale as I realize who it is, what she can do, and what she has done. She's here now. The people Timothy are trying to stop. I try to fathom if Timothy has had enough time to get ready, if we have any hope at all. The priest suddenly starts speaking behind us, and I heard a voice amidst the 4 beasts, and I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and its name that sat on it was Death, and hell followed with it.